Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Almost 3 months after the deadly collapse of a concrete canopy in Serbia, tens of thousands of students are still taking to the streets, peacefully revolting against the government. So, what comes next? We'll have extensive coverage from Serbia in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. A draft bill to restrict immigration has been rejected in Germany, a painful defeat for the leading Chancellor candidate. A former Polish justice minister faces detention after refusing to testify over spyware scandal. And Eurosceptics quit the ruling coalition in Norway. After a 24-hour blockade of a major intersection in Serbia's capital last weekend, anti-government demonstrations are ramping up again, with more mass protests expected this Saturday in the city of Novi Sad. Our Balkans correspondent, Paweł Czafskowski, is on the ground and joins us now. Good evening, Paweł. What's the latest?
Well, I'm now in Novi Sad, Serbia's second largest city, and also a birthplace of the current civic disobedience movement. Actually, right next to me is the city's railway station, and part of the roof of this railway station, more specifically a concrete canopy, collapsed 3 months ago, killing 15 people. And this tragic incident was a catalyst for civic disobedience and anger of some members of the Serbian society, anger at what they say is current government's corruption. And for 3 months they have been taking to the streets protesting. Initially these were mostly students and academics, and initially they were mostly ignored by the government. But with time, persistence and perseverance, they are finally being listened to. Very recently, just this week, the Prime Minister of the country and the Mayor of Novi Sad resigned in a bid to appease the protesters. Also, it seems that the current government and the country's president, Aleksandar Vučić, are ready to make more concessions, but the protests only intensify. We are in Novi Sad because tomorrow a blockade of the 3 major bridges of the city is expected. Around me you can see people gathering, and they are gathering for the protests, and they are gathering to greet some of those who actually undertook a march from Belgrade to Novi Sad, an 80-kilometer march to make a statement. And they are supposed to arrive, a couple of hundred of people are supposed to arrive in Novi Sad in about half an hour. And what the protesters want is, first of all, bringing those responsible for the Novi Sad tragedy to justice. But as the protesters claim, that it would only be possible if the rule of law is reinstated in Serbia, and to do that, new fair elections should be held in the country. Whether this will happen is uncertain. But there's one more uncertain thing when it comes to this political conundrum in Serbia, and this is a puzzling silence from European countries about the matter. Serbia is set to become an EU member state soon. It's on its road to accession. However, few European leaders made a statement on the current situation in Serbia, either condemning or supporting any of the sides. And to shed more light on this puzzling silence, our reporter Piotr Miszczuk has this story.
I was journalist for this.
It wasn't supposed to be him, that is Italy's Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani. It was supposed to be her, the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, but the Prime Minister scrapped her plan to visit Serbia amid the political turmoil in the country. With little to no commentary from EU leaders on the situation, Serbians might feel abandoned.
EU is counting that Vučić will guarantee the stability not only in Serbia but in the whole region, and they are really afraid of democratic transition.
The protests were triggered by the death of 15 people, including a child, after the collapse of a roof awning at the Novi Sad railway station in early November, which is seen as a catalyst for the public outrage. Although Serbia receives significant aid from the EU, recent events did not drum up more direct support from the bloc. The reason might lie in the fact that the demonstrations appear to be rudderless.
On the other side, on the side of the opposition, there is no very strong political force at this very moment. Also, the opposition does not have a lot of credibility among the students. So I can imagine that on the side of the European Union, it is also the question, actually, who do they have to communicate with?
But according to the Serbian opposition, there is more to it.
They believe that Vučić is doing his utmost, especially in economic sphere. So he's selling left and right to the Chinese, to Russians, and to European nations all our national resources without any procurement or with illegal procurement.
Europe has of late forged closer ties with Serbian authorities in a bid to pull Serbia away from Russia, which claims that the West is trying to destabilize the country. Serbian opposition figures, however, say this won't prove effective and that Serbia at this point wouldn't be a good fit for the EU bloc.
European Union comes under question mark whether it can be a union of various political values, moral values and systems with simply adding anybody who is an autocrat, or we simply want to have 6 more Orbans and Ficos inside of our family.
Now it seems Vučić exercises near total control over his country, which is why there's only one thing that could set a pro-democratic transition in motion.
Only a very massive, regular and determined movement of citizens and students together can put enough or sufficient degree of public pressure on the institutions that something has to change.
And for now, people are not willing to stop the protests. For TVP World, I'm Piotr Miszczuk.
A dramatic day in the Bundestag, with political tensions flaring up again over migration. The saga came to a head on Friday afternoon as the bill in question failed to pass by just 12 votes. Sasha Farbach reports.
Germany is on the road to federal elections in February, and the political tension is palpable. There were dramatic moments in today's parliamentary session, with emotions running high. Unusual accusations of breach of trust and lies were hurled at each other by members of the chamber. Tensions have become heated in the German parliament and on the streets of various cities, making the stakes high for defining elections just weeks away.
This bill is a political signal, and of course is tied to the fact that in 3.5 weeks we will have a federal election. That is probably going to be the most important election in at least a decade.
Friedrich Merz, the Conservative Party leader and frontrunner to be the next German chancellor, has been under fire this week, as the ruling coalition have accused him of breaking the political firewall by working with the far-right AfD. Yet some experts say that Merz has ruled out any partnerships with the AfD.
He has not negotiated with them. He has actually tried to get the two parties in the minority government, the Greens and the SPD, on board with this bill. And the bill says nothing revolutionary or extraordinary that hasn't been discussed before in Bundestag.
In a vote of 338 in favor and 350 against, the bill failed to move forward. But even before the vote, experts doubted its success.
This law will probably not be implemented, simply because the German Senate, the Bundesrat, representation of the federal states, will probably reject it. And then there's still the hurdle of the federal president signing and so on. So it's very unlikely.
Yet this week saw much deliberation and debate about the role of the far right in Germany. The AfD has seen its numbers rise, yet some experts believe that mainstream parties can still turn the tide and garner voters for them.
Still enough and still in time to on time to save the mainstream politics in Germany, at least in this electoral process.
The bill itself, known as the Influx Limitation Act, would have limited the right of asylum seekers to bring their family members into Germany, would have allowed for wider powers of the federal police in asylum cases. Overall, migration still stands center stage as a key issue ahead of the elections.
There is a majority of Germans who want to favor tougher migration, who favor tougher laws on migration. But the question is not whether we should pass those, but the question is how and whether they should be passed with the support of the far right.
Today's bill was short by 12 votes and showed again that the debate on migration and the future of Germany before the election will remain a tense one. Sascha Farbach, TVP World.
The European Commission is putting social media giants under a so-called stress test to ensure the platforms, including X and TikTok, have enough safeguards in place to combat misinformation. It comes just weeks before Germans go to the polls to decide their next government. Susanna Jurek has more.
Behind closed doors in Brussels, social media giants responded to a summon from the European Commission. The purpose? To show how they battled the misinformation endemic to their platforms, a test that is mandated by the Digital Services Act.
The DSA obliges platforms to make sure there is no illegal content online. It obliges platforms to provide risk assessments.
The penalties under the Digital Services Act could probably be of a bigger sort of leverage.
The stress test comes just weeks before the German parliamentary elections, which are being closely watched by everyone in Europe, not least because of the highly surprising involvement of one public figure, Elon Musk. When Musk is not busy throwing out questionable signals, he is preoccupied with blatant endorsement of the far-right parties in Europe.
I'm really strongly recommending that people vote for AfD.
Such endorsements from someone who happens to be the owner of one of the most popular social media sites, X, have not come without scrutiny from experts.
Germany is a focal point both for Russian attempts to interfere and now even for certain American actors who are quite obviously, like Elon Musk, trying to make an impact.
It is particularly timely when just weeks prior, Musk and the CEO of Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, were seen taking center stage during Trump inauguration.
Attention is what is now the commodity. Donald Trump has been known for his ability to bring that attention, to his politics. Having the people that actually are in command of these global companies, that have such a huge impact.
But for some experts, the stress test is seen as too little, too late.
We have now a whole range of people also on the other side of the Atlantic who are apparently opposed to European integration.
Particularly as warnings about the use of social media by state actors have long been at play.
TikTok has been used as a weapon of the Chinese Communist Party to target people in the West, to truly use it as a mind weapon.
Most recently, in the highly contested and now annulled presidential election in Romania, where TikTok came under scrutiny for swaying the vote in favor of the far-right Călin Georgescu. But as early as 2016, Russia's misinformation campaign on social media was seen as playing a pivotal role in the electoral victory of Donald Trump.
We know that it's not just about hacking into electoral systems and state registration systems.
And dealing with it is proving to be an uphill battle, with social media owners alleging freedom of speech suppression at every turn of the proposed regulations.
We absolutely refute any claims of censorship on our side.
Which poses questions. Will EU lawmakers be able to combat misinformation? Or will all of these efforts result in nothing more than too little too late? For TVP World, I'm Susanna Jurek.
A former Polish justice minister is facing a 30-day detention over his refusal to testify before a committee investigating a spyware scandal some have called Poland's Watergate. Zbigniew Ziobro is the latest in a series of conservative ex-government officials attempting to evade prosecution. Kazimierz Szwysiek reports.
The center liberal government of Donald Tusk is accusing Poland's former Minister of Justice, Zbigniew Ziobro, of using the highly sophisticated Pegasus spyware against prominent opposition figures during the rule of the conservative Law and Justice administration.
The times of Zbigniew Ziobro running the show are over. We won't be puppets in his own show any longer.
As the committee investigating the scandal was convening in Parliament on Friday, the ex-Minister of Justice Zbigniew Ziobro was giving an interview to a private right-wing TV station. On the order of the court, the police showed up to deliver him to the committee for questioning. But the committee had no intention of waiting for the former official any longer. They closed the proceedings after filing for a 30-day detention of the former minister.
Cowards in the committee shut it down before I got there.
The deputy chairman of the committee says the former minister is like a kettle calling the pot black.
Mr. Ziobro, under different excuses, avoided hearings of our commission since June last year. He avoided it 5 times.
Members of the conservative opposition claim it's all smoke and mirrors.
If they use force, he would like to be present here. Then, as you can see, they simply run. So I think that this is only political theater.
But Zbigniew Ziobro is not the only former government official to avoid questioning. One of his closest advisors, ex-Deputy Justice Minister Marcin Romanowski, recently fled to Hungary, claiming he wouldn't be treated fairly by the justice system he once represented himself. A judge who often worked with Ziobro's aides also defected, but to Belarus, a totalitarian country under Russian control. The investigative committee, on the other hand, says the evidence speaks for itself.
Pegasus system, which is highly sophisticated system to be used by law agencies against terrorists, against kidnappers, etc., was used against members of the opposition during Law and Justice government times. And it was used against judges, it was used against journalists, it was used against many people who were treated as enemies.
It is now up to the Polish courts to decide whether to detain the former justice minister for 30 days, as requested by the investigative committee. Whether the Polish former Minister of Justice Zbigniew Ziobro actually gets temporary detention or not, this case is bound to continue to stir emotions, especially here on the corridors of the Polish parliament. While there have been no convictions just yet, the investigations continue. From Warsaw, TVP World, Kazimierz Łysiak.
A political crisis in Norway as the government collapses due to a dispute over EU energy law. The Centre Party has quit the coalition, but that doesn't mean the administration will fall. Under the Norwegian constitution, early dissolution of parliament is not permitted. Anastasia Yanchenko explains.
The political landscape of Norway has been shaken as the Eurosceptic Centre Party decided to exit the ruling coalition. The coalition partners were divided over their approach to new EU regulations that are to introduce a common energy policy.
This is not an outcome I wished for. The cooperation and friendship in this government have been strong, and my collaboration and friendship with the finance minister have meant and still mean a lot to me.
Despite Norway not being an EU member, as a country of the European Economic Area, or EEA, it is obliged to adopt EU economic legislation, including laws related to energy. These regulations are intended to implement standards and goals of a common climate and energy policy.
It is a wise idea to save the planet, but in times of energy crisis, in times of political turmoil, it might not be the priority, especially for a country which is a heavy hydrocarbon producer like Norway.
People in Norway have in recent years experienced unstable, high electricity prices, and Norway has been connected to a dysfunctional electricity market in the EU.
Norway's outgoing finance minister emphasized that his country should instead seek to regain control over energy regulations from the EU.
It is wrong for Norway to continue in that direction. We must take back more national control, and we must not give more power to the EU system.
The collapse of the coalition leaves the Prime Minister's Labour Party on its own in the cabinet until this year's election, scheduled for September 8.
We return now to our top story, the ongoing student protests in Serbia. Demonstrations have been taking place since that deadly collapse of a train station canopy in the northern city of Novi Sad in November. The almost daily anti-government protests have even prompted the Prime Minister to quit in a bid to ease tensions. Here to break down all the latest developments is Vujo Ilic, Research Fellow at the University of Belgrade. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
A pleasure to have you with us. Can I start with the significance of these protests? Is it fair to say that this is the biggest public opposition President Vučić has faced since taking power more than a decade ago?
Without any doubt, this is the most significant challenge to Vučić's rule. There is a quantitative and qualitative difference to what has been going on. First of all, in December, there was a mass protest that included around 100,000 people in Belgrade, which is the largest demonstration we've had in decades, or maybe ever. And the other thing that happened is that student organization is very different from anything that we've had before. The students have organized blockades in the faculties. They are organized based on democratic principle of direct democracy. And they are not associated with any other political actors or even formal or informal civil society organizations, which makes it very, very difficult for President Vučić to discredit or co-opt them, which wasn't the case with the previous protests.
Much of these demonstrations have centred around both the tragedy in Novi Sad and that alleged state corruption. Is Serbia corrupt?
There is a lot of corruption in Serbia. That's true. However, what these protests are focused on is the accountability of elected officials. When the canopy in Novi Sad fell, this opened questions of not only how good are these constructions works. Serbia has experienced an explosion of construction in constructing industry in the last 5 or so years. And the whole question of how well have these been constructed is paired with the question of how much did these projects cost. Most of these contracts are made through interstate agreements. This particular is with Chinese companies, which means that usually they are non-transparent. So as you can imagine, this opened all kinds of questions about where is the money going to and what are the citizens actually getting for their money.
And we've already seen that Prime Minister Vučić has quit to try and bring down the temperature. Did that have any impact?
At the moment, I would say did not have much impact. The students are very specific about their demands, and they are. When you said these are anti-government protests, that's partially true. There is a demand from the government for accountability, but the students did not demand necessarily all these resignations and so on. They demanded accountability, and they're also demanding criminal responsibility for what happened in Novi Sad, as well as transparency in the money flows and the construction documents, which means that it takes time for these demands to be fulfilled. Right now, what we are all wondering is, how will the students actually evaluate this? Legal procedures take time. We all understand this, and so it's a big question. How long can this movement maintain this momentum, knowing that the legal process can take weeks, months, or even years?
Do you expect to see more political change at the top, more resignations, even if it's not precisely what the students are calling for?
Actually, yes. Prime Minister resigned on Tuesday, and on Monday, the President Vučić announced government reshuffle. So even though this resignation of Prime Minister was sudden, we all expected that there would be a major reshuffle of the government, and President Vučić was announcing 50% of the cabinet would be replaced. What could be expected is that more ministers would form this government outside of the ruling Serbian Progressive Party, which means that we could look ahead for some sort of expert-run government, similar to the previous Prime Minister, Ana Brnabić, who became a Prime Minister in 2017 and to 2019. She wasn't a member of the ruling party. We might actually expect something like that to happen again.
When it comes to President Vučić, do you think he realised how problematic this disaster would be for him and his government? Do you feel like he was a bit complacent about this disaster?
I think that the reaction caught Vučić by surprise. We can see this because in the beginning, the government was trying to first ignore or downplay what happened, saying that there is no responsibility. Things like this simply happen. And secondly, the old repertoire of either carrots or sticks was employed. There were people that were organized by the ruling party who were trying to break the demonstrations. And on the other hand, President Vučić tried to co-opt the youth by offering them a very cheap credits for housing. And you could see that there were a lot of different attempts to de-escalate the situation, to either co-opt or confront these students who were demonstrating, but also. The government is really good at waiting things out. It has more resources, it has more power. And in all the previous demonstrations like this, and in Serbia, we have this almost every year, government would wait out. And this did not play so well. As a matter of fact, most of the things that were attempted were counterproductive, and they actually instilled even more opposition. So I would say Vučić was caught by surprise. And 3 months later, we are still in a crisis that is even deeper than what we all anticipated.
Now, Brussels has been largely quiet about what's happening on the ground, certainly not speaking with a united voice. Could or should the EU step in? Why do you think the EU has been so mum on this?
Well, I would start by saying that the usual way that the government is dealing whenever it's challenged domestically is to say that all of these domestic upheavals are somehow manipulated from the outside, blaming the West and so on. This is the general narrative that we see all the time. But what's really surprising about the situation now is that there is no external support for this social movement organized by the students, and Serbia is in a strange situation that both Russian and the U.S. Officials have more directly or indirectly condemned what has been going on. They are not on the side of the students, and they are supporting the government. When it comes to the EU, there was a lot of support coming from different political groupings. But you're right, the Commission or the Parliament itself, there was no direct. The EU has been silent. I would say that the EU is trying to pull Vučić towards the West. This has been the case especially in the last year or two, and that right now Vučić is more valuable to them for various geopolitical reasons than they actually care about what is going on with civil rights and democracy in the country.
Vujo Ilić, Research Fellow at the University of Belgrade, thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.